Hey guys, and welcome to your 12th Java tutorial, and today we're going to be starting with my object-oriented programming tutorials. And first of all, I'm going to teach you how to create an object based off of a class. Now here I have my calc class. Now you're like, okay, well last tutorial we used calc.whatever to access the methods, but there's an easy way to do this, and you don't have to do it most of the time. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. It depends on the class. But in this case, it doesn't really matter if you do or not because I created it myself. So you use the class identifier. You name your object whatever you want. I named it C. Then you have to use the new operator. You always have to use new. And then calc. And I didn't put anything in my parentheses because I actually don't even have a constructor method yet, and I'm going to be telling you guys about that either in this tutorial or the next tutorial. But that's how you create an object of a class. An instance of a class is what it's also commonly called. Now down here I've done c.addition, and we're passing the parameters again, that little football. It's going to go ahead and it's a void method, public void method, and it's going to do console.writeLine. Now you've noticed probably that I didn't use the word static. And in C#, unlike say Java, because Java, if you make it a static method, it can be accessed by either doing calc.whatever or calc.addition or c.addition, but if you do static, it gives me an error because it cannot be accessed with an instance reference. Qualify it with a type name instead. So no static methods for objects in C#. And then I just did c.subtraction 5, so this is going to should print out 10, 0, and it does 10, 0. Okay, so now I'm gonna try and do calc.addition 5, 5, and it gives me an error. An object reference is required for the non-static field. Since it's not static, I can't just simply use the calc header, the class identifier. If I want to use the class identifier, I have to make it static. And so right here, since I have calc.addition and c.addition, it's not ever, if you can't ever do that. You either have to create an object or you have to not create an object. You can't do both, because there's no way in C# to use the class method and an object method and have it be called the same name and have it be able to be capable of doing both. So that's the difference between static versus object methods. And now I'm going to create a constructor other than calc. So let's just say let's make another calc. So let's just do calc c2 equals new calc. Actually, I don't really need to do that. Okay. Now whenever you do a constructor, the only thing you put on it is public, and you name it the same exact thing as your class, calc. And so this is going to instantiate, is what it's constructing a object, but it's also technically called instantiation. Can you say that? Instantiation. So let's say int x equals 5 and int y equals 5. So now, since we have this new constructor here, whenever you create a new object, it's going to automatically call this constructor, and it sets these integers equal to 5. And then I can go ahead and do like addition. So I don't, and then I can take these out if I have the constructor call those methods addition x comma y, and so then it'll send down 5 because x equals 5 and y equals 5, and it'll send down 5 here and 5 there, and then I can do the same thing for subtraction. x comma y. And so it should print out the exact same thing that I had before, which is 10, 0. So that's an easy way to do that. But usually, just to let you know, you usually don't put a method call in a constructor. You usually just initialize your variables. So like the way this would usually be set up, just to let you know again, you would usually initialize the variables out here, because if I put int x and int y in here, if I declared them in here, I would only be able to use them within this public calc because it's inside of this little constructor method here. But since these are outside of any method but inside of the class, I can use these variables in any of these methods here, which is really cool. So I can actually make these non-parameter methods if I want to, and just do c.addition and then c.subtraction. And so since I took out those parameters, I don't need them. And I can even do just x plus y, that's not a y, just x plus y, and then x minus y. And it'll do the exact same thing that I've had it do the whole time. 10 and 0. So there's multiple ways that you can do this, and it's really more convenient to do it one way versus the other. But when you get into some really hardcore programming, yes, it's hardcore programming. This way is probably going to be more common, where you just define your variable outside and then you set it equal to that. And now I'm going to talk to you about overloading. Overloading is when you have like two things that are called the same name or use the same signature is what it's called, but it actually does something different. So let's do a public calc and then put int x comma int y. Actually, let's not do that. Int num2 num1. And then down here I can send in parameters 5 comma 5. So you're like, how does this work? Okay, so if I create an object, actually let me send in a different number, 7 7. Okay, so if I create an object without putting 7 7 here, so let me go ahead and do that now. Let me do calc c2 equals new calc with no parameters. So whenever I create this object, it's going to say, okay, so we're going to make an object of the calc class called c2, and it's going to be a new object, and then it's going to say, okay, so which constructor do we use? And it's going to look here and say, okay, so we're going to use the calc constructor method without any parameters. So then it'll come down here, okay, here's the calc method with no parameters, and it will automatically set these attributes to 5 and 5. Oh, I forgot to do something. X equals num1, y equals num2. Okay, so let's, okay. But then when I call this first one here, it's going to say, okay, we're going to make an object of the calc class called C. Stop doing that, oh my gosh. Called C. It's going to be a new object, and we're going to do the calc constructor with 2 parameters, and then it'll come down here and say, okay, so here's the calc constructor with 2 parameters. Let's pass this 7 into num1 and this 7 into num2. So now it's going to say, okay, int x up here is equal to num1, and this int y is equal to num2. And so now, instead of using 5 and 5 as the default, it uses whatever I passed in, which is 7 and 7. So now it should do C2. And so now it has 14 and 0, because it does 7 plus 7 and 7 minus 7 rather than just 10 and 0, and then it prints out 10 and 0 when I do it for C2, which has nothing in it, and I use the default. Excuse me, that was a yawn. And so that's the basics of that. And usually, generally speaking, whenever you make a class and you're gonna have it make objects based off of it, you usually want to name your data attributes like these. You want to make them private. And I'm actually going to talk about this in the next tutorial. So that'll be talking about data attributes of a class for a method, the instance of a class. So I'll see you in the next tutorial, and I'm going to be using this exact same code for that tutorial, and I'll see you then.